Imagine, for just a moment, that you have no home to return to. Imagine that every street you once knew has become dangerous. Every familiar face a possible informant. Every night a question of whether you will survive until dawn. Imagine leaving behind your house, your business, your memories, your relatives, your city, and even the graves of those you loved because your only crime was believing that Allah is one. Imagine being pushed out into the darkness with nothing but faith in your chest and dust on your feet. For years in Makkah, that was the reality of the believers. They were mocked, hunted, beaten, boycotted, and starved. They were forced into isolation in the mountain pass. Hunger gnawed at them until leaves became food. Fear became normal. Grief became routine. Peace felt like a rumor from another lifetime. Now imagine arriving in a new city after all of that pain. You are finally safe, but safety does not erase trauma overnight. Safety does not instantly refill an empty stomach. Safety does not magically restore stolen wealth, reunite separated families, or heal a heart that has spent years under persecution. You are in Yathrib, the city that would soon become Al-Medina Al-Munawwara, the radiant city. But you arrive there not as a powerful conqueror, not as a wealthy merchant, not as a celebrated hero. You arrive as a refugee. You are one of the muhajirun, the immigrants, the ones who left everything behind for Allah and His Messenger. Peace and blessings be upon him. And then, as you walk through the streets of this new city, you notice something unexpected. You see people celebrating. You hear sounds of festivity. There are gatherings, laughter, clothing chosen for joy, customs inherited from an older world. There are days that people once used to mark with games, amusement, and communal excitement. And in your chest, something stirs. After all the years of sorrow, after all the sacrifices of Makkah, after all the tears hidden in the night, after all the pain of migration, after all the uncertainty of beginning again, a question begins to rise inside the heart of the believer. Will the people of faith ever have a day that belongs to them? Will those who suffered for the truth ever be given a day of pure joy? Will there ever be a celebration not rooted in ignorance, vanity, or distraction, but in gratitude, obedience, and divine mercy? Before we go deeper into this moving and unforgettable story, take a moment right now to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. And if this kind of Islamic history strengthens your heart and makes the Seerah come alive for you, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember the beauty of this deen. Because what we are about to revisit is not just history. It is identity. It is memory. It is the spiritual DNA of the Ummah. Then came the declaration that changed everything. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, informed the people that Allah had replaced those old festival days with 2 days far better than them, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. That statement was not merely a social adjustment. It was not a small correction to a local tradition. It was the announcement of a new, sacred rhythm of life. It was the birth of a civilization whose moments of joy were linked to worship, whose celebrations were tied to remembrance, and whose happiness was rooted in submission to Allah. This was not joy for the sake of forgetfulness. This was joy as an act of gratitude. This was joy after obedience. This was joy after sacrifice. This was joy that came with purpose. To understand the emotional power of the first Eid al-Fitr, we have to step into the second year after the Hijrah. This was not an ordinary year. It was one of the most transformative periods in early Islamic history. The Muslim community in Medina was still young, still healing, still finding its shape, still learning how to live not as a persecuted minority hiding its faith, but as a distinct ummah being guided directly by revelation. For around 16 or 17 months after the migration, the Muslims had prayed facing Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem. Then came the command that changed the direction of prayer toward the Kaaba in Makkah. This was more than a geographic adjustment. It was a declaration of distinct identity. The Ummah was being formed, visibly and spiritually, under the guidance of heaven. Not long after that, in the month of Sha'ban, another command descended, one that would shape the soul of the Muslim forever. Allah revealed that fasting had been prescribed upon the believers just as it had been prescribed upon those before them so that they might attain taqwa. For the first time, The Muslims were commanded to fast the entire month of Ramadan. We hear that today and it sounds familiar, almost automatic. But imagine being there when the command first arrived. Imagine hearing that for the first time in history. An entire month would now become a season of hunger, discipline, self-restraint, recitation, prayer, purification, and nearness to Allah. There was no inherited culture of Ramadan yet, no memory of childhood suhoor, no yearly expectation of iftar gatherings, no decorated homes, no lanterns, no established routines. They were the first generation to live it. And what a generation they were. They fasted not in comfort, but in hardship. They fasted under the Arabian sun, in homes of mud brick and palm trunks, in a city still being built, with bodies that had known deprivation for years. Their suhoor may have been little more than dates and water. Their iftar may have been exactly the same. They did not have abundance, but what they had was something greater than abundance. They had hearts ignited by Iman. They were tasting the sweetness of obedience. They were discovering what happens when the body is denied so that the soul can awaken. They were learning that hunger for Allah is stronger than hunger for food. They were experiencing Ramadan not as a cultural season but as a fresh revelation from the Lord of the worlds. Yet this first Ramadan would not unfold in stillness. It would not be a quiet month sheltered from the storms of history. In the middle of that very first Ramadan, the greatest crisis the Muslims had yet faced descended upon them. News reached Medina that Quraysh was marching with a force so large, so armed, and so determined that the future of Islam itself seemed to hang in the balance. The same Quraysh who had tortured the weak, stolen wealth, expelled families, and pursued the believers from Makkah were now coming to crush them completely. 1,000 men, armed warriors, pride, rage, and vengeance filling their hearts. They did not march merely to intimidate. They marched to erase Islam. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, consulted his companions and prepared to meet them. But what did the Muslims have? Only around 313 men, a small group compared to the massive Meccan force. They had only a handful of horses and a limited number of camels. Men took turns riding because there were not enough mounts. Many were poorly equipped. Some had little more than simple weapons. They were fasting. They were physically drained. They were not a polished empire. They were not a seasoned military machine. They were a wounded community standing on faith, walking toward what looked like impossible odds. At Badr, the earth itself became a witness to one of the most extraordinary moments in human history. The believers stood facing an enemy far larger, better armed, and outwardly more powerful. Yet the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, turned to Allah with a dua so intense, so desperate, so sincere that his cloak fell from his shoulders. He begged his Lord that if this small group were destroyed, Allah would no longer be worshipped on earth as he deserved. This was not a battle over land. It was not a battle over tribe. It was a battle over whether the light of revelation would continue to shine in this world. And Allah answered. He sent down tranquility. He sent down help from the heavens. He sent down angels to strengthen the believers. Against all worldly expectation, the Muslims won. The army that had come to extinguish Islam was broken. The tyrants who had oppressed the believers fell in the dirt. Abu Jahl, the arrogant enemy of truth, was brought low. The impossible became reality. The weak defeated the mighty. The refugees overcame the superpower. The persecuted stood victorious. But victory did not come without tears. Some of the finest companions were martyred. Families grieved. Loved ones were lost. Blood mixed with sand. And so when the Muslims returned to Medina, they returned carrying two emotions at once, grief and gratitude. That combination is essential to understanding the first Eid. The first Eid was not born in shallow comfort. It emerged from a community that had bled, endured, obeyed, and survived. They had fasted through hardship. They had fought while weak. They had buried martyrs. They had witnessed the help of Allah with their own eyes. They had tasted the bitterness of sacrifice and the sweetness of victory almost at the same time. Their tears had not even fully dried. Their wounds had not fully closed. And yet their hearts were alive with certainty. Allah had not abandoned them. Allah had seen them. Allah had carried them through. Then Ramadan moved toward its end. The final days passed. Fasting continued. Quran was recited. Supplications rose in the night, and when the 29th evening arrived, eyes turned toward the horizon. The sky over Medina softened into evening colors, and somewhere above the darkening edge of the earth, the new crescent appeared. A thin silver sign cutting through the dusk. Shawwal had begun. The first Ramadan in Islam had come to its close. Now another command came to life among the believers. Complete the number and magnify Allah for guiding you so that you may be grateful. And so Medina began to echo with takbir. At first from one home, then another, then from many directions at once. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illa Allah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Walillahil hamd. The streets carried it. The walls carried it. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it. This was not a lifeless chant. It was thunder from healed wounds. It was faith given voice. It was the proclamation of a people who had seen the impossible become real. Imagine Bilal, once a tortured slave pinned under a stone in Makkah, now free in Medina, raising his voice in the takbir of Eid. Imagine companions who had fled with nothing, now chanting the greatness of Allah as victors of Badr. Imagine mothers whose hearts still ached with grief, yet whose tongues still declared the praise of the Lord who had given their loved ones martyrdom. Imagine children hearing that takbir and sensing that something sacred was unfolding, something the world had never heard before in that form. This was not merely the end of fasting. This was the sound of a civilization breathing for the first time. But Islam never separates joy from justice. Before the community could fully celebrate, the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, established something that reveals the mercy at the heart of this deen. He commanded Zakat al-Fitr, a charity to be given before the Eid prayer, so that the poor would not be left behind on the day of celebration. Think about the genius of this command. A festival day can easily become cruel if only the wealthy can enjoy it. New clothes, abundant food, and visible happiness can deepen the pain of those who have nothing. Islam refused to let Eid become a mirror of inequality. It refused to let joy belong only to the comfortable, so every Muslim was instructed to give from staple food to those in need. Dates, barley, raisins, nourishment, provision, enough so that the poor would not need to ask on that day, enough so that widows could smile, enough so that orphans could eat well, enough so that refugees without means could still feel the generosity of belonging, enough so that no stomach in Medina would be empty while others celebrated. This is one of the most beautiful dimensions of Eid. Before you go to the musalla, before you stand in prayer, before you gather in your best clothing, you make sure the vulnerable are seen. You make sure your worship spills outward into mercy. And there was more than social wisdom in it. There was spiritual purification too. Zakat al-Fitr would also cleanse the fasting person from the shortcomings that may have touched the Ramadan fast. Every stray word, every lapse, every moment of heedlessness could be polished by this final act of giving. So the first Eid morning began not with selfish indulgence, but with purification and generosity. Before celebration came service. Before feasting came feeding others. Before appearance came sincerity. Picture Medina in those early hours. Households preparing, food being distributed, families remembering the martyrs of Badr, the poor receiving provision, the lonely being included. The atmosphere charged with gratitude and expectation. Then the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, prepared himself for the morning. He bathed. He wore his best garments. He honored the day with cleanliness and beauty. This too is part of Islam's balance. There is humility, but there is also dignity. There is simplicity, but there is also beauty. The believer does not celebrate by arrogance, but neither does he treat the gifts of Allah carelessly. To present oneself well on Eid is to honor the blessing of the day. Then the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, did something deeply meaningful. He ate before leaving for the Eid prayer. It is authentically narrated that he would eat dates in an odd number before going out for Eid al-Fitr. This may seem small, but it contains a powerful lesson. For an entire month, the believer had been trained to stop eating at dawn in obedience to Allah. On Eid, the believer eats in obedience to Allah. The issue is never hunger or food in itself. The issue is submission. We abstain because He commands it. We eat because He commands it. The Muslim is not ruled by desire, habit, or personal mood. The Muslim is ruled by revelation. Then came one of the most magnificent public scenes in early Islam. The Eid prayer was not held inside the mosque, even though the Prophet's mosque was the heart of the community. Instead, he led the people out to an open space outside the main built area of Medina. Why? Because Eid was not meant to be hidden. It was a public sign of Islam. It was a display of unity, gratitude, and communal strength. It brought everyone together in one visible body beneath the open sky. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, made it clear that everyone should come. Men, women, young girls, elderly women, even women who were menstruating and would not perform the actual prayer, were instructed to attend the gathering and witness the goodness, the supplication, and the communal joy. This is extraordinary when you stop and think about it. In a world where women had often been marginalized, Islam brought them into the heart of the Ummah's sacred moments. The first Eid was not a narrow event for a small elite. It belonged to the whole believing community. So imagine the roads of Medina that morning. People emerging from homes in their finest garments. Some simple and patched, some cleaner and more elegant, but all honored by Iman. Men walking with humility and joy. Women coming out to witness the great gathering. Children wide-eyed with excitement. The Takbir continuing to rise. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Every phrase carrying history inside it. Allah is greater than hunger. Allah is greater than loss. Allah is greater than exile. Allah is greater than Quraysh. Allah is greater than fear. Allah is greater than every force that stands against truth. For the hypocrites in Medina, this scene must have been unsettling. For those who doubted the future of Islam, this was a warning. This was no fragile group about to disappear. This was an ummah becoming visible, coherent, confident, and alive. The same refugees who had once fled under cover of night were now walking in broad daylight in unified worship. The same believers who had once hidden their faith in Makkah were now filling the landscape with takbir. The same community once mocked as weak had now survived migration, revelation, fasting, battle, and victory. The first Eid was a message not only to the believers but to every eye watching them. Islam was here to stay. When they reached the Musalla, the prayer began without adhan and without iqama. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, stood before the people, and the rows stretched behind him under the sky. In the first rak'ah he made the extra takbirat, raising his hands and declaring the greatness of Allah repeatedly. The crowd followed. What a sight that must have been. A sea of believers moving in disciplined unity, saying Allahu Akbar together in the clear morning air. No palace, no decorated throne, no worldly display of kingship. Just a prophet on the earth, a people behind him, and the greatness of Allah above them all. He recited the Quran. His voice carried over the open plain. The words of Allah settled over hearts already softened by Ramadan and Badr. In the second rak'ah, he made the takbir again. Then the prayer was completed, and he turned to the people to deliver the first Eid khutbah. He praised Allah. He reminded the people of guidance, obedience, gratitude, and righteousness. He encouraged charity. He taught them. He strengthened them. He kept their joy anchored in remembrance. Eid in Islam is not mindless entertainment. It is worship expanded into celebration. And then came one of the most tender moments of all. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, realized that the women gathered behind may not have heard the khutbah clearly because of the size of the crowd. So he went to them personally, accompanied by Bilal, and addressed them directly. He reminded them, encouraged them, and called them to charity. What happened next reveals the living faith of that generation. The women began taking off their jewelry and handing it over for the poor. Not later. Not after a committee meeting. Not after postponement. Right there. Earrings, rings, ornaments. Immediate generosity. Immediate response. Immediate desire to please Allah. What kind of community gives like that? A community whose hearts are not chained to this world. A community shaped by revelation. A community that understands that Eid is not diminished by giving. It is completed by giving. This is one of the great tragedies of our age. Many people have inherited the outward shape of Eid, but not always its soul. We remember the clothing, but forget the charity. We remember the food, but forget the poor. We remember the gathering, but forget the takbir. We remember the photos but forget the purpose. The first Eid teaches us that real joy becomes more beautiful when it includes others. After the prayer and khutbah, people returned home. Yet even here the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, taught a subtle sunnah full of wisdom. He would return from the Eid prayer by a different route than the one he took going out. Scholars have reflected deeply on this. Perhaps so, more parts of the earth would bear witness for him. Perhaps so he could greet more people and spread joy wider. Perhaps so more neighborhoods could see the strength and unity of the Muslims. Perhaps all of that and more. In Islam, even the road back from celebration can contain meaning. And what happened after that? Halal joy. Pure, clean, thankful happiness. Families visited one another. Food was shared. Hearts relaxed. Smiles spread. Children played. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, allowed innocent recreation on Eid. We know from authentic narrations that on later Eid days, young girls sang simple verses and beat the duff, and the Prophet did not crush that joy. He protected it. He taught that every people have a festival, and this is our festival. On another occasion, Abyssinians displayed their skill with spears in the mosque courtyard, and the Prophet allowed Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, to watch. This tells us something important. Islam is not a religion that suffocates the human spirit. It disciplines it, purifies it, and then allows it to breathe in what is lawful and beautiful. That is why the first Eid matters so much. It teaches us what joy looks like when it is passed through revelation. It shows us celebration without heedlessness, happiness without arrogance, beauty without vanity, public festivity without sin, and communal strength without oppression. It gives us a model of what it means to rejoice as servants of Allah rather than as prisoners of appetite. The first Eid was not built on excess. It was built on worship. It was not born from luxury. It was born from endurance. It was not rooted in entertainment alone. It was rooted in gratitude after trial. Think about that carefully. The first Eid came after years of persecution, after migration, after poverty, after the first Ramadan, after Badr, after martyrdom, after tears, after fear, after uncertainty. And yet the community still stood tall. Why? Because their joy was not dependent on perfect worldly conditions. Their joy came from Allah. That is a lesson modern Muslims desperately need. Too many people wait to celebrate until life is flawless. Too many think they can only rejoice once every problem is gone, once every wound is healed, once every injustice is solved. But the first Eid teaches us that believers can carry sorrow and gratitude at the same time. They can grieve and still praise. They can remember pain and still say Allahu Akbar with conviction. So when we wake up on the morning of Eid today, what should we remember? We should remember those first believers. When we put on our clothes, we should remember the people who wore simple garments with the honor of faith shining brighter than silk. When we eat before the prayer, we should remember the prophetic lesson that we fast and feast only by the command of Allah. When we hear the Takbir, we should not hear it as background sound. We should hear it as the cry of Bilal, the anthem of refugees, the declaration of a community that survived the impossible. We should hear in it the truth that Allah is greater than all personal anxieties, all political storms, all enemies, all griefs, all fears, all futures. When we pay Zakat al-Fitr or Sadaqat al-Fitr, we should remember that Eid is not complete if our neighbors are hungry. When we gather for prayer, we should remember that this is a symbol of the unity of the Ummah. When women, men, and children come together in that sacred atmosphere, we should remember that the first Eid was intentionally inclusive, intentionally public, intentionally powerful. When we visit family, we should remember the Prophet's call to maintain ties and soften hearts. When we smile at a child on Eid, we should remember the orphans of Badr and ask ourselves whether we have made room in our celebration for those who are carrying pain. And perhaps most importantly, when we say Allahu Akbar, we should mean it, not as a whisper of routine, not as a slogan of culture, but as a lived truth. Allah is greater than the money we do not have. Allah is greater than the doors that closed in our faces. Allah is greater than the fears that follow us at night. Allah is greater than the confusion of this age. Allah is greater than oppression, greater than exile, greater than illness, greater than loneliness, greater than everything that tries to shrink the believer's heart. The first Eid was a public declaration that the people of La ilaha illa Allah belong to the Lord who is above all things. This is why Eid is not just a holiday on a calendar. It is a victory lap of the soul. It is the believer stepping out after a month of discipline and saying, "By the grace of Allah, I made it through." It is the community standing together and saying, "By the mercy of Allah, we are still here." It is a rehearsal for a greater celebration yet to come. The day when the believers, by Allah's mercy, enter paradise and hear the final welcome. Every Eid in this world is a faint echo of that ultimate joy. It reminds us that obedience is never wasted, that tears shed for Allah are never forgotten, and that the path of faith always leads somewhere beautiful, even if it passes through deserts first. So do not reduce Eid to fashion, photos, and food alone. Enjoy those blessings lawfully, yes, dress well, eat happily, visit people, give gifts, let children laugh, let homes be warm, but never empty Eid of its origin. Never forget that its first dawn rose over a city of refugees, martyrs' families, worshippers, givers, and survivors. Never forget that its first sounds were Takbir and Quran, not heedlessness. Never forget that its first spirit was gratitude, justice, unity, and remembrance. Never forget that the Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, built this day with mercy so that no poor person would feel abandoned, no woman would feel excluded, and no believer would forget their Lord in the middle of celebration. And perhaps that is what makes the story of the first Eid so emotional. It is not merely a story of one day. It is the story of how Allah teaches a wounded community to smile again without losing its soul. It is the story of how revelation transforms celebration from a worldly escape into an act of worship. It is the story of how a people who once trembled in fear in Makkah could one day fill the open air of Medina with the words Allahu Akbar. It is the story of faith maturing into civilization. It is the story of pain being carried into praise. It is the story of Islam teaching humanity that joy is not forbidden, but sanctified when it is connected to the Creator. If this history reaches your heart, then let it change the way you live your next Eid. Let your takbir be louder in meaning, if not in volume. Let your charity be more intentional. Let your gratitude be more conscious. Let your family gatherings include remembrance of Allah. Let your celebration have dignity. Let your children learn why we celebrate, not only how. Teach them that Eid was born from sacrifice, not consumerism. Teach them that the Ummah's joy has roots in revelation. Teach them that our festivals are not borrowed identities. They are gifts from Allah, given to a people He guided, purified, tested, and honored. And if you are listening to this with a heavy heart, if your own life right now feels more like Makkah than Medina, more like exile than arrival, more like fear than celebration, then remember this too. The first Eid came after hardship. The believers did not know in the darkest moments of persecution exactly how Allah would open a door for them, but He did. He brought them through, one stage at a time. He gave them Medina. He gave them Ramadan. He gave them Badr. He gave them Eid. Your story too is in His hands. So keep walking, keep obeying, keep trusting. Keep saying Allahu Akbar until your own heart believes it completely. This is the legacy of the first Eid. A legacy of resilience. A legacy of worship. A legacy of charity. A legacy of communal joy. A legacy of prophetic balance. A legacy that still belongs to us if we are willing to reclaim it. May Allah let us witness many Eids with faith, gratitude, and sincerity. May He allow us to revive the Sunnah of our Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him in our homes and communities. May He make our fasting accepted, our charity purified, our takbir alive, and our celebrations pleasing to Him. And may He gather us one day in the eternal Eid of paradise, where there will be no fear, no grief, no hunger, no exile, and no farewell. If this journey through the history and spirit of the first Eid moved you, share it with your family and friends so this legacy can stay alive. Leave a comment with your reflections and let us know what part of the first Eid touched your heart the most. And subscribe for more deep, powerful stories from Islamic history, the Seerah, and the lives of the companions, so together we can pass this amanah on to the next generation. Until next time, may Allah fill your heart with light, your home with barakah, and your Eid with meaning.